And that's the latest from the WOR Newsroom. Lester Smith reporting over WOR New York, your station for news as it happens. I'll be back with another full 15 minutes of all the news at 11 o'clock. But right now it's time for Gene Shepard. Oh, I have bad news here for you tonight, friends. I mean, it depends on your relationship to the animal world. But for those of you who watch, the Disney-type animal things constantly, don't worry about that record yet. Let's stick with the first one here, gang. Let's get with the show here. The thing that I have to report tonight is that we have received. Have you heard of Old Raider? Any of you heard of Old Raider? Fantastic scene going on up in Alaska. Yeah, Old Raider. Old Raider. It sounds like a very bad bourbon. But it is not. A cabin-wrecking grizzly bear who leaves a gigantic 12-inch track. That's a fantastic track. Do you realize his foot is 12 inches long? Think of an animal with a paw 12 inches long. He leaves a gigantic 12-inch track and does not hibernate like other bears. Now, generally you can consider a bear as being incommunicado for at least a few months. You figure, he's knocking off, taking his nap, and everybody can get out and play and sing and grow their radishes while the bear is doing what bears do, hibernate, right? This one does not hibernate. And he's going all the time. And he may set, according to the latest information we have here, he may set a hell-raising record. The worst hell-raising bear along the Salchow River near Fairbanks in Alaska. Known as Old Raider, he has wrecked 27 cabins along a 50-mile stretch of the river in 1 month. Now, this is the new record, by the way. We have to salute him. It's a new record. A cabin wrecking record of 50 was set by a bear 3 winters ago. Old Raider has now gone over that record in this 1 month of 7 cabins that he has wrecked. The current cabin crushing technique is so much like the one of the 1969-1970 series that many persons suspect that it was Old Raider who was out working at that time. But he's just coming back now to break his old record and to show them that Old Raider's got plenty of fight left. Give it a... Oh, God. Oh. Bring it on big. I want to hear the sound of Old Raider wrecking a cabin. Well, hold it up. Oh, thank you, Ed. Thank you. We got women and children listening. Thank you, Edward. That's very good. You must admit that you never see that kind of bear in Disneyland. No, you don't. In fact, if you will watch the animal world, if you gain your knowledge of the animal world from television, most people, I'm sure, have the feeling that bears and other cuddly creatures like that are really just displaced Santa Clauses. They're kind of furry, elderly uncles, cuddly, and kind of funny. You remember Gentle Ben? Remember him? Well, what you didn't see, if you look carefully at the Gentle Ben, well, you could see it if you look carefully, that attached to Gentle Ben, he had this collar on. Did you notice that? He was wearing a collar? Do you remember that he wore a collar all the time? Now, attached to the collar in practically every scene that he was seen on television was a gigantic, like a 5-inch steel chain that attached Gentle Ben to whatever concrete post you could set in the ground, like 40 feet, to keep him there, so that he didn't just wade right into the crew one day, eat up the camera, start on the power truck, and devour 4,000 miles of tape. But this is the way bears are. In fact, the bear, it's kind of discouraging to realize this, that the bear, in actual competition with other mammals, is one of the least predictable of all creatures. You are aware of this, that animal trainers will tell you they just as soon have 4 or 5 tigers than one walking around polar bear. Oh, incidentally, the polar bear is considered the most the most dangerous of all mammals. Are you aware of that? I mean, he is something else. And having been in Alaska, and I can appreciate the story of old Raider there. It's a great name, I can just see him waiting in the weeds, and then he comes roaring out. He sees another great cabin ahead of him, and he does it. In fact, I heard a story. I don't think I told this story, and it's just what happened in Juneau a couple of seasons ago. Juneau is an Alaskan town, and it's right on the coast, and it's a kind of a curiously beautiful town. It looks like in a way, when you're far back from it, if you were, say, a mile or 2 back from Juneau, it looks like a miniature San Francisco, laid in the middle of these fantastic mountains, and way high above you, you can see tiny waterfalls, and you can hear a muffled roar of distant and a kind of multitude of waterfalls all around the town. And this is the way the town sounds on an average day. This is a summer day, and during the winter, of course, it's a different story, because there's snow on these mountains, and occasionally you can hear the sound of an avalanche in the distance. However, on one ordinary walking around Sunday, the citizens of Juneau are just like any place else. They sleep late on Sunday and all that sort of thing. And there were a bunch of them had gone to this church. There are a lot of little churches in town. It's a little compact city, by the way. Juneau is a little tiny place. It was compact. And when something happens on one end of town, the vibrations are heard on the other end of town almost instantly. I mean, you drop a bowling ball on one end of the city, and people jump on the other side of town. They hear it. It's just like that. And incidentally, the town, due to the fact that it's almost completely surrounded by mountains, on 3 sides, just all around it, it has a natural parabolic effect, which is to say, if you blow your horn too loudly in Juneau, you're liable to knock glasses off people's cupboard shelves for blocks around, just because of this parabolic effect, you see. Well, everybody is at the church on this Sunday morning, and they're coming out. It's about 8:30, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, something like that, and they're all dressed up. When one of the parishioners, whom I happened to talk to, just a guy, he said he'd come out of this thing, see, and he felt kind of great, that church was over today. He could hardly wait to get back to his pad where he could have a couple of fingers of bourbon to bring back his spirits after church. See, incidentally, I might tell you that Juneau is one of the highest heavy drinking towns in the world. Drinking is a preoccupation in Juneau. In fact, it is an occupation with several of the people there. It's not a preoccupation. Their job happens to be an afterthought after drinking. They drink heavily in Juneau. So he said he came out of and of course, they all say that it doesn't affect you up there. That's due to the climate and all that. So you can drink a lot and nothing happens. This is apocryphal. In fact, I saw two guys sitting at the bar there. Actually, it was the Polar. No, it wasn't the Polar Bar. It was the Red Something Bar right on the main street of Juneau. They looked like they were made entirely out of rubber, these two guys. They were so bagged. So, nevertheless, these people came out of church on this Sunday, and the sun was out. A beautiful day. And it was one of the 2 or 3 days of the year that the sun actually came out in Juneau, because it rains there steadily. Either rains or snows. And the sun was out. And he said he thought that was a little unusual. So he walked out, he looked up, and he said, by God, there's the sun. With that, 3 or 4 people looked up the sun. They started, they staggered away and hold their hands over their eyes. They don't see it much. When he looked down at the end of the street and he sees this, he thought that, he said at first he had the idea that somebody had just come into town. Somebody new come into town. They were wearing a big fur coat. And he looked down there, and he being a naturally jovial person, this is the way it is in Juneau, he waved down there. He says, hi. With that, this thing stood up on its hind legs, and he saw it was not a person wearing a fur coat. It was a grizzly bear wearing his fur coat. And he proceeds to come right down the main street on his hind legs. He said he never saw anything like it. This grizzly bear, standing up on his hind legs, he comes to about 8 feet, or maybe 9. That's a very large person to wade amid the congregation of a Presbyterian group who have just spilled out onto the street. And he said he just waded right down the middle of the street, see? And he's looking around, and he's got his arms outspread as if to embrace the population, which apparently he was trying to do in one swell whoop. He just comes out, he lets out one roar, and he says, a fantastic scene. Everybody had just come out of the church, the Reverend was standing there on the steps and saying, thank you very much. I appreciate the fact that you liked my sermon today on the subject of sin. I say he who liveth in a glass house shall not, and he's going on like that, and all of a sudden the bear goes, whoa! Well, the whole crowd spun. He said it was a fantastic sight. They all spun as one person. He says the ladies, kids, everybody there, even the minister. He said they spun as one person, and the bear let out another one, which echoed from the mountains for miles around. And he said, as one person, they turned. Just as one person, they turned. His is a great sight. Because all the other houses were closed up. It was Sunday. Everybody's asleep. See, and there's a little crowd of people on the street there in front of the church. He said they turned as one person. He said they didn't say a word. They didn't yell and holler like, help, help, here comes the bear. He said nothing. They just all turned, and he said with just absolutely one instinct, they went thundering down the street. The people are running down the street, and this bear stands up, and he sees this crowd running, see, and he stands up and he goes, aah! Well, by that time, the roar has echoed all the way down to the other side of Juneau. And people are starting to look, out of the windows, and, gee, Fred's coming home early this Sunday, drunk. Listen to him yelling on the street. And with that, he lets out another, he says the entire town of Juneau proceeded to evacuate immediately. They're jumping into their station wagons, cars, the whole bit. And he said they're roaring out of town. And this bear just walks right down the middle of the main street on his hind legs. He said it was the biggest cinnamon bear, grizzly cinnamon, that he had ever seen. Now, a cinnamon grizzly is legendary up in the Alaskan area. That the cinnamon grizzly is a little slightly different species of grizzly, I guess, but they're a different color. They grow larger. They are rarer. And they are the meanest animal. On 2 feet. Remember, they walk on 2 feet most of the time when they're in business. He said the meanest animal on 2 feet that this earth has ever seen. And this big cinnamon grizzly just walked right down the main street of Juneau, Alaska, never looking to the right or left, and every couple of minutes he would raise his arms and go, aah! Walk right through town and right out of town, up the mountain, and they could hear him stomping up the side of the mountain. thank you. Very good. That was very nice. And that concludes tonight's salute to Disneyland and those cuddly little bear people. This is WOR. Speaking of great stalkers in the night, this is WOR, who stands now with its great arms outstretched, pointing its way now, its great snout towards Staten Island, and going, my God. You're tough. Mean. Hey, listen, we got a new sponsor tonight, and I'm going to lay it on you. You know, we've had a lot of good sponsors in the past that deal with restaurants, and for a long time, people have been writing to me saying, listen, you've been laying some good Chinese stuff on us. You know any good French, Italian type restaurants in New York City? And we do. In fact, this restaurant, which is over on 46th Street, which is right off the theatrical district, you know, just off Times Square, 344 West 46th Street, is called Jack's Epicure. Now, if you're curious why they call it Jack, that's a strange name. It sounds a little bit like some kind of a one-arm joint, but it is not. No way. You know why they call it Jack's Epicure? Jack's, this is an interesting story, is one of the great legendary speakeasies of New York back in the days of Prohibition, and it was called Jack's. And at that time, this great legendary speakeasy was operated by a famous six-day bike racer, of all things. And all the showbiz people came to Jack's. It was a famous and a really authentic speakeasy. And if you'd like to see the way a speakeasy actually looked, it remains to this day as a legendary underground restaurant in New York. And a lot of the people who come there, this is a curious thing, are people who were there during the days of Prohibition. I mean, a lot of the customers and stuff still hang around down there. And it's a fine northern, well, it's northern Italian, southern French cooking, you know, that border cooking that is a very unusual kind of cooking. In case if you know anything about Italian food, you know that the further south you go in Italy, the more they run to pasta and tomato sauce and so on. That's the Sicilian southern cooking. The farther north you go, the more the food becomes more and more like French cooking. Or it's hard to tell which came first. But it becomes more northern in that it runs more to veal dishes, all kinds of elegant fish dishes and so on. Till finally the northern border of Italy, Trieste, and that whole area, shares a lot of its cooking with France. And this is the kind of cooking that they have in Jack's Epicure. It's elegant food. The prices are good. It's French and northern Italian food. The address, again, is 344 West 46th Street, and they're open Monday through Saturday for lunch and dinner. They're open for dinner Monday through Saturday. They're closed Sundays. And when you go in there and you look around, what more elegant than to have a French restaurant whose owner is named Victor? I mean, it almost sounds like it was done in central casting, but you go down and you look for Victor Maillet, and Victor will come out and he will tell you, if you ask him, he will tell you about the day that Bob Hope, who was playing on Broadway at the time, making practically no money, paid for his meal by check, which bounced, and they still have the check there. So this is Jack's Epicure, 344 West 46th Street. Try it. Food is good. Now, you know, getting back to this bear scene, I don't want to, you know, burden you with terrible bear stories today, but I'm going to, actually. You want to hear more about bears? Because when you get up into Alaska, practically the first thing you hear about are bears. And you don't hear about bears down here much. Nobody talks about a bear. And bears are a big subject of a lot of talk up there. In fact, to carry it even further, this is kind of a gruesome story, but in one town that I was in Alaska, I was met at the plane. And by the way, one of the strangest airlines, not strange in the sense that it's not a good airline, it's an excellent airline, but one of the curious, I can only say interior decor and attitude airlines that I've ever been on in my life is Alaskan Airways. You ever hear of Alaskan Airlines or Airways? It flies from Seattle up to Alaska. That's the only place they go. And in the interior of Alaska, well, their airplanes are decorated very elegantly inside. Now, these are jets. These are, 737s and 727s. And they look like a regular, standard airplane from the outside. But when you get inside, totally different scene. For one thing, you're used to the fact that airplane seats are a certain kind of decor. They're usually light blue, this kind of a burlap-like knit, that kind of fabric they have, or they're some kind of a naugahyde plastic and so on. But this airline's seats are decorated and are upholstered in dark red. I mean solid red. Dark, almost wine-colored red. Dark red velvet. Now how's that? I mean the back and the seat. Well, that's not all. Up above where the luggage rack hangs, in most airplanes they have this luggage rack. Well, their luggage rack is lined with this dark red stuff, and hanging from the edge of the luggage rack is a dark red curtain with a gold ball fringe. I mean, you have a feeling like you're in an 1895 bordello, which is incidentally what they're striving for. And the girls, fantastic costumes the girls wear. The girls wear these Russian Cossack jackets with the high collar, that big high circular collar, and the jackets are blood red. And they wear these short kind of billowy knickers, black knickers, the pants they wear, and high black boots. And they wear the Cossack hat, that high fur hat that sticks way up. And they have interesting stewardesses or stewardess to begin with, because many of them have Eskimo and Indian and even Russian backgrounds, because they come from Alaska. There's a lot of Russian influence up in Alaska. If you ever get up there, you know that the churches and everything all around there, you think like you're in old Minsk or someplace. In certain areas there, they have these onion-type churches, with the onion steeple on the top, the old Russian Orthodox. And all the names are on there, a lot of Russian names. Practically every other restaurant or hotel is named Baranov. Do you know who Baranov was? Okay. All right, we'll leave that for your homework. But nevertheless, getting in this plane, say I get in a plane and they have this purple velvet, this red velvet, everybody sits down. And it gives a different feeling to an airplane inside. It's a curious feeling of déjà vu. It's a hard feeling to describe. It's like something out of the remote past. And yeah, here it is. It's in an airplane. And these girls have this kind of high cheekbone, this subtle exotic quality they're radiating. So we sit down on a plane, and the plane takes off. And we are now flying over the ice fields near Mount McKinley. Nothing but tremendous fields of ice. By the way, this was not too far from the area where that plane was lost, with the Speaker of the House in it. And this is real wilderness. Oh, boy, is it that. I mean, you see nothing but these great glaciers, great long sheets of endless ice and peaks, mountain peaks. We're whistling along, and we're not too far from Russia. Russia's about, maybe 100 miles airline from there, which is a very short flight for a jet. And you can almost see just the faint outline of Siberia over there, off to your left as you fly north in this airplane. In fact, the pilot came on the intercom and he said that at this point we are now under surveillance of the Siberian Air Force fighter base that's just opposite us. So they're watching us on radar. He said we're always being observed. He said, and occasionally we'll see a few MiGs will come out and just fly along out over the strait there to observe us. He says, if you see them today, no worry about it. He said, they know us and we know them. Everything's fine. He said, but we are now under radar surveillance of Siberia. And so we're whistling along at 35,000 feet when from back of the plane these girls wheel this cart out. And this is the most interesting snack, if I can call it that I've ever had aboard an airplane. And I've flown on airplanes all over the world, including Air Niger. There's a goodie. Including Air Liban. You know where that is? That's the Lebanese Airlines. These are all the airlines. I wish I had an ashtray or something from all the airlines that I've flown on. I've flown on airlines all over the world, and this one sticks in my mind. We are now flying over the ice fields, and we're in Alaska. It's hard to believe this is an American place because there's so many alien things to it that really are not typical of what you think of as our home. For one thing, they had a gun rack in the airplane. Beautiful, polished teakwood gun rack that when you got aboard the plane, you would just put your gun in the gun rack. Well, the guns, and they were beautiful guns. People carrying aboard these 30-06s and all these big, heavy rifles, and they just put them in a rack there, and the girl snaps them into the rack. In fact, I have a picture of a stewardess carrying this great big Mauser aboard the plane. She's going to put it in the rack. So we're whistling along. You can see it's exotic. These guys are all lounging. These sourdough-looking types are all casually lounging around in the seats with their big wool checkered shirts and their fur caps, and they have this slit-eyed look of a man who has peered into the north wind too long, and he finds that nothing any longer frightens him at all. And so they're lounging around, and from the back of the plane we hear they're preparing our little thing, our little feast. And the little feastie's coming up. With that, these two girls wearing the Russian costumes push this very ornate cart. Now, it really was ornate. It was ornate in the 19th century elegance style. It was made of what looked like polished brass, but it had these big brass wheels, but very ornate, all kinds of curly cues, and it's almost nouveau art. And they're pushing this cart forward. And on the cart, in the middle of it, was a magnificent, beautifully polished brass. And it looked like a real antique. I'm just curious where they got it. Beautifully polished brass samovar. You know what a samovar is? It's great serving. Out of a samovar, you serve your tea. It's a great polished brass pot with ebony handles on the spigots. And they wheel this out, say, well, yeah, the two girls are working the thing along, and they're giving each one of us little tiny glasses, which are real glasses, no plastic. Little tiny glasses with gold, what looked like gold, I suppose it wasn't, but with gold filigree on the outside of the glasses. You know the kind of glasses that have a little metal base like with filigree around them? Elegant European-style glasses. And they're handing us each one of these little glasses. They're about the size of a shot glass, really, but very elegant. And so at that, she gives you your glass, and you hold your glass out, and she very carefully turns the spigot, and out of the spigot of the samovar comes this steaming liquid. It goes. It's hot. Now, being a typical airline rider, I figured, this is some kind of instant tea or something they're laying on me. Well, I took one sip of this thing, and I want to tell you, my left eyebrow flew up, and it's still loose. It has not yet attached itself. It was not at all what I thought it was. And I said, this is great. What is this? She says, this is a drink we serve on the plane. And I said, it is. What is it? She says, it is a Russian drink. You will enjoy it. You just drink it. Well, at that point, I said, well, okay, what the hell? When in Alaska, do as the Alaskans do. So I downed my thimble full of this stuff. And it was exceedingly fulfilling is a good word. It was fulfilling. And it appeared to be a concoction of some kind of hot coffee with apparently a dash of some sort of chocolate, rough chocolate liqueur, with obviously a large dollop of high quality vodka, with some rare spices. All of it, the combination in that thimble, steaming in that airplane flying over the ice fields, looking down upon on Mount McKinley and the great roaring chasms of the wilderness. It was a very nice touch. So I passed back my glass for a second, and the second was even better than the first. It was amazing how that stuff tends to become even more jovial as time wears on. And a third and a fourth. And by George, within an hour, we are flying north towards Nome, which is way far north. if you got your map of Alaska out, you'll see the flight from Juneau to Nome is a long, long way. And they kept pushing that samovar back and forth and serving beluga caviar. Oh, do you like caviar? Well, now, I've never really been a caviar cuckoo, but I might say that caviar is one of those dishes one must be introduced to in the proper manner. That when in the Arctic, drinking a concoction of Russian vodka, beluga caviar has a curious attraction. It, too, was fulfilling. And so we're flying north, and all the while I see that gun rack up there, and I see these girls moving back and forth under the dark red velour of a 19th century bordello. I realized that there are other ways to live. That the ambassador flight is not necessarily the ultimate in experience. It really isn't. And so we flew out, and as the plane landed at one out, really way out. Now, I don't know why I started on this Alaskan thing, but if you find it interesting, I will continue. Do you, Ed? The plane landed on the way up. See, we're flying north, ever north, as Robert Service would say. And as you fly north, ever north, the conditions change, obviously, because you're flying thousands of miles, and it's getting colder and colder, until finally we landed at it looked like it was a single strip, and it was not a real airline terminal. I think it was a hunting station, actually, is what it was, where some mail is dropped off and some mail is put down and picked up, and one passenger gets on, and it was a little tiny shack, just a little shack, just about the size of Studio 3 here, which is not very big. Now, we've had it enlarged since Earl Dowd came, but it's not very big. The studio is, it's about, this little shack was about 20 feet deep by about 5 feet across, a little narrow shack, and that's it. It's made out of wood, painted white, and back of it you saw this great, great ice sheet rising to the sky. Now, why we stopped there, I don't know, but I immediately got out of the plane. We were going to be there for about 5 minutes, so I got out, and I felt this breeze blowing cold. There's something unmistakable about a glacial wind. If you've ever felt the glacial wind, it feels like a permanent wind, and it is. And what a glacial wind is, you could go into it geologically, but it basically is a wind that's produced by the constant contrast between vaguely warmer air and colder air that is coming off of a glacier. This is a giant ice cube, really, is what a glacier is. So you have this steady, cold, clammy, but it's the kind of icy wind that you feel when you open the freezer compartment of your refrigerator and you feel that puff of coldness. Well, it's that kind of coldness. And so this wind is just blowing softly with no puffs or anything, just a soft, steady breeze, like somewhere there was a big fan just going, just blowing. It was coming down from the glacier, and very, very, very cold. And so I step out of the plane, nothing, but not a sound anywhere, just this breeze. And the stewardess comes out of the building, and she's carrying this Mauser, which she's going to put in, and we're waiting for, passengers. So finally, the passenger walks out, and he's got a big Mackinac on. He's got this big Mauser, and he was something. He was not a hunter. He's not a tourist, obviously. And he just walks past me, and I see another guy standing by the building, and I walk over to him, and I said, "Quite a place." He said, "Yep." I said, "Must be pretty lonely around here sometimes." "Yep, it is. But planes come." They don't come in the winter, but they come. We see people once in a while. And I notice he is wearing his jacket with the left sleeve pinned up to the shoulder. And I'm not the kind who asks people questions of things like that. And so I just said to him, "Well, good to see you." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Come back sometime." And he said nothing more, because that's where they talk in Alaska. They assume, it's like one big family up there. You'll be back, see. Apparently I didn't look like a tourist. He said, "Come on back sometime." I said, "Yeah, okay." So I get in the plane, And I'm walking past the stewardess who is putting the gun in the rack. And I said, well, that's some guy back there. She said, yeah, he's in charge of this thing here, this station here. I said, oh, yeah. She said, you notice his arm? I said, yeah, I did. She says, a bear got it. I said, a bear got it? I mean, this is kind of a surprising thing. You don't run into that often here in New York, guy's arm taken off by a bear. And I figured he must have been hunting a bear or something, and the bear was wounded. We always have this myth that bears and things don't do anything unless evil man, comes and tells them to do it or causes them to do it. And I said, the hunting accident. Oh, she said, oh, no. I said, what happened? She said, well, the bear attacked his cabin. I said, the bear attacked his cabin? She said, yeah, he just came down out of the mountain and smashed his cabin. I said, you mean he just came down and saw the cabin and said, let's get rid of the cabin? She said, yeah, well, they do that. She said, they attack cabins, just destroy them. And if there's somebody in it, he's in trouble. And I said, well, he was obviously in the cabin. She says, yes, he was. And the bear destroyed the cabin, got his arm, and he just barely got away. And I said, well, how did he get away? She said, well, a friend was coming over to visit him that day. and the bear saw the friend just as he was about to do in this guy. Here he was, his arm was gone, and he took out after the friend. I says, well, did the friend get away? She says, yeah, he got away. He got up this fir tree. And I said, what happened? She said, well, he stayed in the fir tree for 2 days till somebody came and rescued him. I said, the bear stayed on. Well, at that point, see, I said, excuse me, do you have any more of that stuff out of the samovar? She said, why, of course, sir. She goes back and turns on the samovar, and we all sat quietly drinking this vodka concoction on the way to Nome. And I'm thinking all the while how much better this stuff is tasting, especially since I see that guy with that sleeve pinned up. And I figured this isn't a good place to go down. I mean, this airplane better stay up. And so we're sailing along. I finally get up to Nome there, see, and this great big airstrip there, just laying out there. Man, I'll tell you, that's some airstrip, see. And the plane comes down. There's nothing, absolutely no trees, nowhere, nothing. No trees. That's beyond the tree line. It's tundra. And by the way, that brings up a subject. I got a letter here 3 days ago from an ex-New Yorker, an ex-listener. He was in this area. I don't know, he might have been from Jersey someplace, but a listener from around here. And he said, Shepherd, he says, I heard you tell those stories about Alaska, and I heard you do Robert's service. And he said, I listened to this for 2 years. And he said, and I finally, when I got out of school, he said, you got me so hung on Alaska and on Robert's service that I had to go up and I had to do something about it. And he said, I wrote letters and I finally got a job. And he said, you know what my job is? He's the leading disc jockey of Nome, Alaska. And he says, I don't think I'm ever coming back. He says, it is fantastic. That's the story. And he says, Albro Gregory comes into the Polar Bar every night and orders beer. He says he drinks they drink a beer called Olympia up there, which is a beer that is brewed in Seattle. They call it Ollie. The guy comes in, he says, give me an Ollie. And that's all they say, give me an Ollie. And he says he comes in and he buys this Ollie and tells us stories about Alaska. You know who Albro Gregory is? I did a show. In fact, he was on my TV show that I did on Alaska. Albro, he does look like a character right out of Hemingway. In fact, he looks like the character Hemingway was imitating. Has a giant beard, he wears this baseball cap. Been in three major escapes out of the frozen north. In fact, one time he was in an airplane that crashed at 64 below zero in the ice fields outside of Fairbanks, and he and the pilot survived and walked back 3 weeks out of the wilds, 65 below zero, with nothing but one blanket between them. How's that for a man? I tell you, he's not going to worry about getting a cab on 6th Avenue. So, nevertheless, this guy writes me the story. So here we come, and I just want to let you know what terrible influence my work has had on guys' heads. There he is up in Nome. He said, it's because of you. And he said, you got me interested in radio anyway. So, anyway, coming into Nome, you come into this big flat. It's just like a plane. It lays on the Arctic Ocean, and there's nothing there. Absolutely nothing. It's just silent. And there's low rolling purple hills rise up in the background. No trees on them, but this low purple reddish undergrowth, which is kind of mat-like. It's curious stuff. But when you get close to it, it's like millions and millions of tiny flowers. This is tundra. Now, on the top of this one hill, if you want to see something really eerie, right on the top of the hill are what looks like, off in the distance you see it, like 4 or 5 great Stonehenge monoliths standing up against the sky, absolutely pitch black, but huge, great, flat, almost like big sheets of slate, black. They look like black rock just standing. That's the only thing on the horizon. They just stand there. And they're huge. They may be 75, 85, maybe 100 feet tall. You know what they are? They're this great radar installation. It's painted jet black, and it stands and just watches north to the Arctic Circle. It's one of the far northern outposts of the dew line. The air warning system just stands on this great hill. And the plane laid down. We got out of the plane and walked towards the airport, and immediately you knew you weren't dressed. You know, there's that cool, clammy coldness that comes in the middle of August. And so the airline has a little room that everybody who gets out, they know you're not going to go anywhere. There's no place you go out of Nome. That's it. You got to come back through this airport. And so they give everybody that gets off the plane a parka to wear. The airline does. And they're all orange and green and yellow, made by the Eskimos up there, by the way. They're green and orange and fur-lined with a fur hood. And they fit you to a parka. They give you the parka, and that's it. You go into town. And that's your parka till you leave town. And so we milled around the airport waiting for a while, to feel that cold air. And down, you could see lower down towards the far end of the runway, you could see the soft sparkling, the silver quality of the Bering Sea, which is curiously milky. It's an odd-looking ocean. No big waves or anything, but it's a true Arctic-type sea. And 5 minutes later, I'm sitting in the bar. The Polar Bar. It's a great name for a bar. And across the street is in front of the Nome Nuggets office is a great carved white. It towers over the street. Is a great carved, painted white polar bear standing on its hind feet. Giant polar bear looking out over the main street of Nome. And I said to Albro, who came in there, he came to greet us. He's the editor of the Nome Nugget. I said, Albro, the polar bears, you have polar bears? He says, do we have polar bears? He says, yes, we do have polar bears. He said, but don't ask to be shown one. He said, because if you get close enough to see a polar bear, you're already in trouble. And I said, you mean you really have He says, yes. He says, you're going up to Kotzebue shortly, which is just up north of the Arctic Circle. We did. We flew out of Nome, went up to Kotzebue. He said, you know that area up there, he says, is considered the polar bear center of the world. There are more polar bears around there than people. He says, that's it. That's where the polar bears are. I said, are they the way they're reputed to be? He said, yes, they are beautiful. That is a beautiful animal. He said, but like most things of beauty, it is probably as lethal as it is beautiful. It's just like a woman, More beautiful she is, the more bad news she is. Just the way it is. The way it is in nature. He said, let's face it, the hooded cobra's a beautiful-looking snake. And the tiger's a beautiful animal, but they don't make nice household pets, in spite of Disney. He said, hey, they're up there. He said, by the way, he says, before you go, he says, you should pick up some of this beautiful ivory that the Eskimos do. He says, they have a sense of humor, He says, they like to do ivory carvings of the mating habits of polar bears. So you ought to pick up one. I said, okay. So, by the way, there's two types of carving, you know. They make one out of whale ivory, and the other is from mastodon ivory, which we find in this area. I said, mastodon ivory? Yes, it's around. So how about another ollie? Hey, bartender, bring 3 more ollies over here. 1 for my friend and 2 for me. That's the way the evening went. Alaska. And tonight, we'd like to salute old Raider, who has just broken his record. 57 cabins in 1 month, destroyed, razed to the ground, and he's still stomping around out there in the tundra. Yeah, this is WOR New York. You stay tuned for Lester Smith and the news.
This is the news in detail on the hour from the WR Newsroom. Lester Smith reporting.